Power in the West is rarely a matter of law or office. In Dodge City, it was measured in spent brass and shallow graves. 3 men owned the cobblestones and the conscience of the place. Every soul in town understood that dark arithmetic. Every soul except the drifter who rode in on a Tuesday morning, looking for nothing more than a bitter cup of coffee at the wrong table. By the summer of 1882, Dodge City had earned its black reputation. It was the graveyard of the cattle trails, the place where the long drives from Texas finally bled out. Cowboys arrived with pockets full of coin and no tomorrow in sight. The town was loud, it was violent, it was profitable. Those 3 things draw a certain breed of predator. Most of them eventually move on. 3 of them decided to stay. The Cord brothers, Wade, Holt, and the boy they called Reno, had arrived 4 years prior. They brought shadows from 3 other territories and the cold ambition of men who realized that moving on was for the weak. They stayed. They took. 11 men were confirmed dead at their hands in those 4 years. There were likely more that the dirt wouldn't give up. Dodge City had learned to live with the Cords the way a body learns to live with a bullet near the spine. It didn't heal. It just built its life around the pain. The marshal, a man named Ike Toiver, had been a hero once. Now he lived on the memory of it. He enforced the law only when it didn't involve the brothers. The Cords were the law that mattered. The stranger had not been briefed on the local customs. He rode into town on scout just past 8 in the morning. It was a Tuesday, the only time Dodge City ever felt quiet. Within 2 minutes, the man noticed the tension. People moved with the careful, sideways glances of those who are always tracking a predator. The Lucky Dice Saloon had 3 horses tied out front at daybreak. It was too early for honest men to be awake, and too late for the Cords to have gone to bed. Scout's ears were pinned back and alert. The animal knew the air was sour before the man did. He hitched Scout at the far end of the street, giving the horse a clear view in 4 directions. He settled the animal with a hand on its neck and walked toward the nearest diner. Over the years, 11 men had sat at Wade Cord's table by mistake. All 11 had stood up and begged for their lives. This stranger was just looking for a cup of coffee. Wade Cord was 38 years old and broad as a barn door. He had eyes like pale blue glass that went flat and dead when the killing fever took him. It was a look that warned sensible men to be somewhere else immediately. Wade walked into Hannigan's diner at 8:15 with his brothers behind him. He stopped short when he saw a man in his chair. Holt Cord, the middle brother, was 34 and lean as a winter wolf. He moved with the quiet economy of a man who had survived 100 fights by never wasting emotion. He stood beside Wade and read the situation in a single heartbeat. Reno Cord was 26 years old. He was fast and reckless. He lived to prove he was as dangerous as people claimed. He wasn't watching his step. He collided with Holt Cord's back, which was typical of his impulsive nature. The stranger at the table did not look up from his newspaper. Wade Cord walked over and stood like a tombstone. He said nothing. Silence was his preferred way to break a man's nerves. The stranger finally turned toward him. Wade told him it was his table. The man noted there were other tables available. He never once looked up. The entire diner went cold and quiet. Other customers suddenly found the floorboards very interesting. Hannigan braced both hands against the counter. He looked like a man trying to vanish while standing still. Wade told him he didn't grasp the situation. The stranger turned a page. He understood it just fine. He had ordered coffee. He would drink it. Then he would leave. Holt Cord placed a hand on Wade's arm. He told him to leave it. Called the man a nobody. Wade watched the stranger. He saw the frayed poncho and the dusty hat. He saw the steady hands on the newsprint. Nobody, Wade agreed. They moved to a different table. Reno Cord pulled out a chair across from the man anyway. He flashed a grin he thought was charming. He told the stranger he was lucky Wade let him slide. Said that didn't happen often. The stranger looked at Reno for the first time. He stared for 3 slow seconds. Reno's grin died after 2. "I know," the stranger said. He went back to his paper. Reno stood up and walked to his brothers. He whispered something that made Holt's expression shift. It became something sharper and more careful. It was the look of a man making a mental note for later. The coffee arrived. The stranger drank it and paid his bill. He folded the newspaper and stepped into the morning sun. He walked straight to the undertaker's. Pruitt looked up as the door opened. He performed a quick, professional appraisal. He saw the wear on the clothes. He saw the way the gun hung. He felt the heavy stillness the man brought inside. It was a quality he had seen before. It never meant anything good. He asked how he could help. The stranger scanned the shop. He looked at the coffins and the ledger. He told Pruitt to make 3 coffins. He wanted them ready by 4 o'clock. Pruitt asked who they were for. The stranger paused at the door. He turned just enough to speak. "For whoever needs them," he said. Then he was gone. Pruitt stood still for a long time. He looked at his workbench and his wood. Then he started measuring. News moved fast in Dodge City. By 2 that afternoon, the stranger's words reached the Lucky Dice Saloon. He knew they would. In a town where 3 men controlled everything, information moved like water toward a drain. He was counting on it. The nameless gunslinger has ridden through the grit of Dust Creek, across the scorched desert, and through the shadows of Cold Creek. Now he stands in Dodge City. 3 men are about to learn that the stranger who took the wrong seat this morning was the most lethal mistake of their lives. Before the first shot is fired, tell me where you are listening from. Drop your country in the comments. Let us see how far this dark trail reaches. Now we return to Dodge City. We return to a marshal who made a hard choice 4 years ago and is about to be asked for a different one. Ike Toiver was 51 years old. He had the hollow look of a man who had spent years trying to occupy as little space as humanly possible. He was hunched behind his desk when the stranger walked in. Toiver looked up with the weary eyes of a man who knew that unexpected visitors never brought peace. "The 3 men in the diner this morning," the gunslinger said. No greeting, no wasted breath. The Cord brothers. Toiver's face shifted. It was an expression of deep, tired recognition. "How long has it been?" the stranger asked. 4 years, Toiver replied. "How many dead?" Toiver looked down at his own hands. 11 confirmed. Probably more I couldn't prove. "And you?" "I have a wife," Toiver said. 3 kids. I made a calculation. The stranger let the silence sit between them. "How old are they?" Toiver blinked, confused by the shift. "The children?" "Yes. 7, 9, and 11. The gunslinger gave a slow nod. He said nothing more. Something in Toiver's posture broke. It was as if he had waited 4 years for a man to ask that question without following it with a lecture. In that heavy quiet, the wall clock hammered away toward 4 o'clock. Toiver said, his voice finding a new edge. The stranger said. Toiver watched him closely. Toiver countered. The gunslinger stood. Toiver asked. He stepped back out onto Front Street. Toiver sat in the silence for a long minute. Then he began to write a telegram. The Garrett Freight Company occupied the south end of Front Street. It was a massive building with double doors wide enough for a loaded timber wagon. In the yard sat 3 freight wagons. In the front was a small office with a window overlooking the thoroughfare. Clara Garrett was 24 years old. She possessed the sharp, focused energy of someone who had been living in terror for 2 weeks and had forged that fear into a tool. Quote, 23, quote, the stranger said. Quote, 24, quote, she replied. Quote, 25, quote, she added, her voice cold. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 26, underscore, underscore. He took a seat across from her. She told him everything. She didn't do it because she trusted the man. She did it because she had run out of choices, and the man sitting before her did not carry the mark of cord business on his soul. A man's pride is a dangerous thing, but his obsession is a slow-burning fuse. Wade Cord didn't want the Garrett Freight Company because it turned a profit. He wanted it because he wanted Clara Garrett, and she had been the first person in years to tell him no. For 4 years, Wade had been carving a world out of the Texas dirt where that word didn't exist. What's the tally? The stranger asked. Clara didn't look away. Quote, 28, quote. She paused, letting the weight of the numbers settle. Quote, 29, quote. The stranger didn't flinch. I've had worse math, he said. Clara studied the weathered lines of his face. Who are you? She asked. Someone who heard what they did to your father, Tom Garrett. That's an explanation, not an identity. I know, he said, rising from his chair with the deliberate grace of a man who knew his own lethality. Stay inside today, both of you. He stepped out onto Front Street. Clara watched from the office window as he moved north toward the Lucky Dice Saloon. He walked with an unhurried, rhythmic stride, the gait of a man who knew exactly where he was going and wasn't afraid of what was waiting there. For the first time in 2 weeks, Clara felt something shift. It wasn't quite hope, but it was a quiet, durable sensation. The feeling that the arithmetic of Dodge City was about to change. Before the first hammer drops on our primer, make sure you've joined our ranks by subscribing. This frontier is wide, and there are many more stories buried in its dust. The stranger spent the rest of the morning dissecting the town. He didn't look at Dodge City from the boardwalks. He learned it from the rooftops, the narrow gaps between buildings, and the shadows where the real history of a place is written. He mapped every alley and every choke point. Scout watched him from the hitching post at the far end of Front Street. The horse's dark, intelligent eyes followed every movement, assessing the terrain with the same quiet competence as his master. It was a partnership forged in a dozen different territories, one life or death situation at a time. He eventually stepped into Rohr's hardware store. Rohr had spent 4 years studying the Cord brothers with the desperate attention of a man trying to understand the machinery of his own cage. He knew their patterns. He knew which of the hired guns were killers and which were just cowards with holsters. You ordered 3 coffins, Rohr said, his voice barely a whisper. Good. Wade's pride won't let him ignore that. He looked the stranger over. You're one man. You don't know these people. You don't know this mud. Why do this? The stranger looked through the glass at the dust swirling on Front Street. Because someone has to, he said. And I'm the someone who's here. Roar leaned over the counter. One more thing. Holt. Don't underestimate him. Wade is the face and Reno is the speed, but Holt is the strategist. He's the reason they've survived this long. He'll be watching, calculating. If he sees an opening, he'll take it. There won't be an opening, the stranger said. How can you be certain? Because I'll have already closed it. At 2 o'clock, he moved Scout. He led the horse from the street to the alley behind Roar's hardware store. It was the best tactical position in Dodge City. Clear lines of sight and 3 different ways to move fast if things went south. Scout entered the alley without a lead, reading the intent in the stranger's posture. He placed a hand on the horse's neck, feeling the warmth of the animal. He murmured. Scout stood perfectly still. That was enough. He knew the cords were coming at 4 o'clock. The boy Roar sent found him at 3:30, but the horse knew first. Scout had shifted his weight in the alley long before the lad arrived. 30 minutes remained. Every passing second felt as heavy as the hammer of a cocked colt. That animal instinct had saved their hides more times than he could count. At 5 minutes to 4, the stranger stepped onto Front Street. The town had emptied with the grim efficiency of a place that knew the smell of death. It was a collective vanishing Dodge City had perfected over the years. Soon, the street was a hollow ghost of itself. There was only dust, the heat, and the Lucky Dice Saloon at the far end. The afternoon sun hung long and golden. It cast his shadow forward like a pointing finger. There is a truth about frontier gunfighters that the legends usually forget. The men who survived were not always the fastest. Speed is a tool, but it is not a savior. What separates the living from the buried is the decision made before the draw. It is the reading of the dirt, the cold calculation of which target to take and in what order. A fast draw on the wrong man is just a quick way to a grave. A methodical shooter who plans his sequence is the most dangerous thing on 2 legs. The stranger had settled his math by 3:30. The gallery man would be first. Cutter would be second. The 2 shadows at the saloon entrance were third and fourth, then Reno, then Holt. Wade would be the final act. Wade needed to watch his world burn before it went dark. He heard the boots before he saw the faces. The Cord brothers approached from the north end of Front Street. They walked 3 abreast, with a practiced, theatrical spacing. Wade held the center. Holt and Reno flanked his right. 4 regulars took the corners by the saloon and the alley. 7 men. 1 street. 1 target. The brothers halted 30 feet away. Wade looked at the man standing alone in the sun. "I heard you ordered Coffins," the outlaw said. "I did," the stranger replied. Wade's eyes were flat and pale as river stones. "How many?" "3." Wade smiled, though the expression never reached his eyes. "Wrong number," he said. "I don't think so." Wade gave a sharp nod. The gallery man moved first. He had the angle, and he knew it. He took his shot before the conversation had even cooled. He missed. The stranger was already gone. A single step left changed the geometry of the fight. The lead buried itself in the dirt. In that same motion, the stranger's revolver cleared leather. The gallery man was finished before the echo hit the Lucky Dice Saloon. 1. Cutter lunged from the water trough with surprising speed. His shot whistled past the stranger's ear. It was close enough to feel the heat of the air. The return fire was already traveling before Cutter could finish his follow-through. 2. The two gunmen at the saloon doors broke position the moment Cutter hit the ground. Their discipline shattered exactly as predicted. One lunged left, the other right. In the space their panic created, two shots barked in the time it took to draw a breath. 3. 4. 4 men were on the ground in less than 5 seconds. Reno Cord possessed a speed that defied God's own physics. He was a lightning strike in human form, the fastest draw the stranger had ever looked across at, possibly the fastest man to ever wear a holster. His gun cleared leather with a grace that would have been legend, if only it had worked. Reno's curse was his own certainty. He knew he was fast. That pride made him commit before he'd finished reading the stranger's shadow. The stranger shifted his weight the moment Reno's shoulder dipped. The Cord boy's shot bit the air 2 feet wide. The return fire did not miss. 5. Reno Cord sat down hard in the alkaline dust of Front Street. His revolver lay useless in the dirt. His career was over. His life was hanging by a frayed thread. Holt Cord had stayed frozen throughout the bloody exchange. He stood with hands at his sides. He watched with the flat, calculating eyes of a card sharp. 5 men were down in less than 10 seconds. The math had been done. Holt was making his final play. The stranger saw the micro-shift in his boots. He noticed the imperceptible drop of the right shoulder. It was the beginning of Holt's last desperate angle. The stranger's muzzle tracked to Holt's heart instantly. Holt's hand hadn't even traveled an inch. Their eyes locked across 30 feet of acrid gun smoke. A long, heavy moment passed. Holt Cord completed the calculation he had been running for years. This time, the numbers didn't add up to a win. He raised both hands into the heat. He let his heavy gun belt thud into the street. 6. That left only Wade. But Wade Cord was a man who didn't know how to quit. He had never been done a day in his life. His face didn't show the usual controlled ice of his anger. Instead, it showed something raw and terrifyingly honest. It was the look of a man watching his empire crumble. It had all vanished in 10 seconds. He couldn't process the reality of it. He drew his iron. He was slow. He had always relied on Reno's speed and Holt's mind. He had always relied on the weight of a crowd. He was slow, and he realized it mid-draw. His hand was moving, but the steel stayed trapped in leather. His face twisted with the recognition of a man out of road. The stranger shot the revolver clean out of Wade's grip. It wasn't an act of mercy. It was cold, terrifying precision. Wade's gun clattered into the Kansas dust. The leader of the Cords stared at his empty, stinging hand. The stranger walked toward him through the settling haze. He kept the same unhurried stride he'd used all morning. "Your brother made the right choice," the stranger said quietly. "Now you make yours." Wade looked at Holt's raised hands. He looked at Reno bleeding in the dirt. He looked at Cutter and the gallery man who weren't moving. He sat down in the filth of Front Street. He put his hands up. The silence after a frontier gunfight has a heavy, haunting quality. It is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of a collective, held breath. A street full of hidden people finally let that breath go. They understood the storm had passed. Dodge City exhaled. The heavy doors began to creak open. The shopkeepers were the first to emerge. Then came the others. Front Street filled with people who had prayed for change. They had just watched the world tilt on its axis. Ike Toiver appeared from his office. He walked with more purpose than he had shown in 4 years. The tin badge on his chest caught the dying afternoon light. Something in his eyes had returned, a flicker of the man he used to be. The math of the street wasn't exactly what he'd calculated, but it was a sum a man could live with. He snapped the iron on Wade Cord without a word. Then came Holt Cord. He took the shackles with the calm of a man who had accepted his own failed arithmetic. Reno Cord was still breathing. The doctor arrived and began the work of keeping that heart beating. It was a mercy the boy didn't deserve, but medicine doesn't pick sides. Pruitt, the undertaker, drifted over from his shop. He stood over Cutter, then the gallery man, making his grim tally. He looked at the street and did the math one more time. He looked at the stranger. 2, Pruitt said, not 3. Wait for the territorial judge, the stranger told him. Pruitt didn't understand, not then. The territorial judge arrived on the evening stage. It wasn't a matter of luck. A wire had been pulled that morning. The stranger knew the moment he stepped into Toiver's office that lead was only half the fix. The part that lasted was always the paper. The territorial judge sat with 4 years of rot spread before him. He read the testimony of Rohr and Hannigan. He heard from a dozen others who had been waiting for someone to finally ask the right questions. Wade Cord was convicted for 3 murders, the 3 they could prove beyond a doubt. They sentenced him to the rope. Pruitt started on the 3rd coffin the following week. He'd been right to keep his saw sharp. 3 boxes. The stranger had been right about that number from the start. Clara Garrett was waiting by the freight office door when he came to say his piece. She had heard the shots. All of Dodge City had heard them. She had counted the echoes and come to her own conclusions. Her face held the look of someone who had finally reached the end of a long, dark road. My father will keep his business when he mends, she said. Ike Toiver will hold the line until then. He's remembering how to be a lawman. Thank you, she told him. She knew the words were thin, but she offered them anyway. He walked to the alley behind Rohr's hardware store. Scout was exactly where he'd been left. The horse was alert, watching the stranger with those dark, knowing eyes. He checked the animal's legs in the water. He swung into the saddle. Rohr appeared at the alley mouth. He didn't wave. He just held up a palm, flat and still. It was the sign of a man who had no words left, so he gave a gesture instead. A shadow moved behind the glass of the clinic on the east end of Front Street. Tom Garrett was sitting up in the bed. The doctors said he wouldn't survive, yet there he was. He watched the man on the raw horse move through the dying amber light. He didn't know the stranger's name. He only knew his daughter was safe. His life's work was still standing. The men who had bled the town were in a cage waiting for the gallows. That was enough. It was more than enough. Scout turned his nose north. I have told you tales of men who hunt for glory, men who hunt for money, men who hunt for blood. The stranger in Dodge City was none of those. He was something simpler. He was a man who saw what was broken and set it right. A man doesn't pull his iron because it brings him peace. He does it because he refuses to let men like the Cord brothers be right about how this world works. I have seen that world. I have breathed its rot, and I will not live in it. Above the prairie, the sky stretched wide and hollow. It bled from gold to amber, then into a deep, bruised red before the coming dark. 3 pine boxes. Pruitt would be busy tonight. The stranger had been right about the Count. He was always right. In Dodge City, nobody could explain that gift, and nobody dared try. Scout moved north, his hooves heavy on the cooling earth. The horizon was a furnace at our backs. Something else is always waiting further up the trail. That makes 4 towns now. Dust Creek at high sun, with 5 guns waiting in the glare. A horse left to the crows in the desert heat. Cold Creek, where 2 men on a porch made their final mistake. And Dodge City. 3 men thought they owned Front Street. They learned they were wrong in under 10 seconds. Before the trail ends, tell me one thing. Where are you listening to this story right now? Put your country in the comments. Let's see how far these tracks go. If you aren't ready to unsaddle, the next story is waiting on your screen. Watch it now. I'll see you on the trail.